Hi there everyone, and welcome back to DnD Horror Stories with DnD Doge. In today's video, we have a story about a player that brings an interesting character to a game of Dungeons & Dragons, only for another player to call them a racist, sexist incel, based off of nothing. A story about a dungeon master ruining the final battle of a campaign by using a cheap tactic, and much more. But before we get into these stories, might I offer you some kitties in this trying time? There we go. Kitties always make everything better. But with that said, let's get into some D&D horror story cringe. Another player calls me an incel for rolling too well, and that I was playing a toxic and overpowered character. By Reddit user, Data the Great. We only played 3 sessions together, all of them online. The players were me, another guy, and 2 girls. We were playing in a homebrew campaign, and the Dungeon Master told us a bit before that the setting was about a world where the world was still recovering from a war that had happened several centuries ago, and that it had left most of the world inhabitable and cursed. The backstory for my character was that he used to be a half-orc who fought in the war, was gravely injured, and had his body turned into that of a warforged. However, the artificers making him were attacked before he could be activated again, and he remained deactivated all this time. The rest of the party found him in a ruin, and he somehow became activated. Basically, I just wanted to play a badass paladin, and I also got really lucky rolling for stats, so I didn't have any stat lower than a 10. The Dungeon Master thought my character had a cool story and a badass design, so he let me play. The rest of the party didn't have a problem, except one girl, Jess, who was playing a tiefling rogue from Royalty. She hated how my character had been introduced differently, while the rest had met in a bar. The war my character had fought in was against demons, and tieflings did not exist back then. And by some coincidence, both of the girls were playing tieflings. So my character kept his distance, which I thought would make sense. But she didn't like it, and said that it was sexist and racist, even though the other girl didn't mind. Oh. So she was one of those that throw terms around so much that they almost lose all meaning. Like, dude, OP was role-playing into his character. It made sense. Also, the other guy was playing a soldier, half-orc fighter. So to me, it made sense that my character would trust him the most at the start. In character, the others asked my player character about his family, and he told them that he had left his wife and child when he had been called to arms, and regretted it every day. Jess, out of character, started calling this an incel fantasy. What? How is that an incel fantasy? And that my character had every red flag imaginable. What red flags are those? Good character concept with a rich backstory that fit the Dungeon Master's homebrew world? She also hated that I had a high AC and did lots of damage, like paladins do. We got into an argument, and the others had to stop the game because she kept insulting me. She later sent a long message saying that she doesn't want to play with us because I'm an incel, and left the group. The Dungeon Master later asked his cousin to play with us. And with that, the trash took itself out. Seriously though, it was pretty presumptuous to call OP all of those things. Methinks she was just probably a spotlight hog in waiting that didn't like that another player joined that had a pretty cool backstory and was playing into his character. Like OP said, tieflings did not exist in his time, and the fact that he fought against demons, which look an awful lot like tieflings, that it would make sense that he would be distant at first. Heck, she didn't even give OP time to develop the character, and failed to see all the great roleplay that could come from that dynamic. But no, she just calls him all the buzzwords in the book that get thrown around all willy-nilly nowadays, and left in a huff like she just ran into David Duke or something. Well, I say that the group will be better for it, and those compelling roleplay possibilities are still there, as the other girl was playing a tiefling as well. Seriously though, some people these days. Let's move on to the next post. Punished for Roleplaying, a Cautionary Tale, by Reddit user Keeper Forever. In our current campaign, I'm playing a Loxodon Drunken Master Monk, which is a super weird build, but a lot of fun. One of the other players is a half-elf, super straight-laced paladin, and our characters have built up a bit of a rivalry because of their moral differences. Example, my character calls the paladin Sir Stick-Up-His-Ass. In a recent scene, we're in a tavern celebrating our saving the city, again. The booze is flowing, and my character keeps swapping his ale tankard with the paladin's via sleight of hand, or sleight of trunk. So my character's is always full, and the paladin can't figure out why he's drinking so much and not feeling anything. The player character is not the brightest, and the player is solid at roleplay. No big deal. A fun, lighthearted roleplay moment, right? Then, the Dungeon Master asked me to make a con save because of all the beverages. I fail, and then he hits me with 3 levels of Exhaustion, which would not have been that big of a deal, but this was also the opening scene of the next act, and we were immediately ambushed by a bunch of undead and demon baddies. So now, we're in a deadly battle with one of the party's key hitters who is now way down in effectiveness. We survived, but it honestly was not fun for me not to be able to do anything. I chatted with the Dungeon Master after, and they took the actions have consequences approach to explain their decision. In my opinion, slapping around the barmaid to get free drinks warrants a F around and find out response, though playing a character that is thematically a large being, plus having drunken literally in the subclass title, I think a few pints isn't going to put him under the table. We agreed to disagree and moved on. The crappy part is that I'm now reluctant to roleplay too deep for fear of getting arbitrarily punished again. On one hand, I'm borderline, it's what my character would do. On the other, I'm bummed that a bit of between character fun turned into a crappy experience. Yeah, I agree with OP here. Giving a player 3 levels of Exhaustion just for having some ale at a tavern is way overkill. Like OP said, his character was a drunken master monk and a big elephant dude. You would think that his character would be able to handle a few. Though, if the Dungeon Master was dead set on having him roll a con save, maybe make it that he has disadvantage on the next initiative roll or something. Not 3 whole levels of Exhaustion, which basically makes the character useless in battle. That is a good way to make a player not have fun, and as a DM, that is not something you should be aiming for. And the whole actions have consequences argument for what this DM did doesn't really hold water in this situation, in my opinion. Though, what do you guys think? Let's move on. Dungeon Master ruins campaign finale for 2 players, by Reddit user MarioFan669. I was recently chatting to a friend about our previous experiences with bad game mastering, and one of mine came up. At the time, I didn't think it was too bad, but thinking back on it, it was pretty damn bad. He thought that I should post this because he said it literally sounded fake with how bad it was, and was shocked that I hadn't yet. So here goes. Background. I've been playing tabletop RPGs for about 5 years at this point. This was during a college West Marches game, which, long story short, was a series of tables running at the same time in the same room every week, where each table could affect another. I had reached level 7, which was the start of the highest, quote, tier of play in the club, meaning our sessions were often much more challenging than someone who was at level 4, for example. It was loads of fun, and we had reached the season finale, which was the last session before we broke up for the summer. Naturally, tensions were high since the plot had led up to this moment, and had a mage BBEG go mad and start resurrecting the body of a giant dead god. We didn't want this to happen, so as a player base, our goal for the session was to kill the mage and stop the god from reviving. The mage had also created a whole army of clones for us to fight through, and the game master was a guy I knew well. He was experienced, and he was known for not going easy, so we were all excited for the tough fight ahead. The game. The game started with our ranger finding out one of our established quest giver NPCs had been kidnapped by the mage. So now on top of a god resurrection, we had to save the NPC as well. We reached the severed neck of the giant god, where our battle would begin proper. There were about 8 of these clones against our 6 party members, if I recall correctly. Through some pre-battle banter with the mage, we also gleaned that one of the clones might be projected onto our NPC friend, and that one of them may be the mage herself, so we had to pick our targets carefully. That was the first annoyance of the game. No matter what we tried, and how many turns we wasted, there didn't seem to be any way to tell who was the real mage, and who was the clones or the NPC. A potion of mind reading simply dealt psychic damage, due to some strange information hazard. All the clones attacked us, all casted the same spells, all talked perfectly in unison, and all died in the same puff of energy. I'm sure there was a clever way to deduce who was who, but the game master didn't throw us a bone at all. So we gave up and assumed that the mage was lying. We killed our way through the clones one by one, each of them puffing into magic after death. We were down to 1 enemy on the board, and thus assumed it had to be the real mage. A swift crit revealed that it was our NPC ally, who was only revealed after the killing blow hit. Then, the real mage drifted down from the sky, apparently invisible and flying for the duration of the fight. I felt like there was nothing we could do but kill our friend here, since the game master wasn't going to move the game along if we didn't attack the enemy on the board. And we still could not tell the clones apart. This was only the slightly annoying part though. Phase 2 began with the main topic of this post. See, through the first battle, each game master from all tables were writing tally marks on the whiteboard at the end of the room. They do this all the time, mostly to mess with people, but also to signify progress to the other game masters. It was revealed to us that each tally mark on the board corresponded to the number of clones that were killed across all tables. That was not all though, as that number was converted into sorcery points for the mage BBEG to use during her phase 2. So opening up phase 2, our game master uses twin spell with Powerword Kill, and instantly kills both me and our fighter. Dude, talk about a dick move. Our sorcerer attempted to counterspell, but was counterspelled in return. Reminder, everyone in our party is no higher than level 8. I'm surprised I didn't just pack up and leave there and then. I just sat there, silently watching a character I had built up over a year die for nothing. The fighter's player almost started crying. The clones powering up the mage was not well explained at all, and even if it had been, we had to kill at least 7 of them to progress on our table, and there were 7+ tables fighting more of them. I don't think it was possible for her not to ever gain enough sorcery points to twin spell it. The fighter was revivified by our cleric, but was then also disintegrated soon after. Jeez. Talk about adding insult to injury. I wonder what challenge rating this mage was. To be honest, I mentally checked out of the session once I was permadead, so some of the information is gleaned through Discord messages from that time. The only reason the party didn't TPK was a clutch wild magic moment where the sorcerer got reincarnated mid-combat and thus regained their hit points and I think their sorcery points fully. Many of the other tables had TPKs, or almost TPKs. I heard the words kill quota floating around, which was a meme we had when I was game mastering the games the year prior. I honestly think they just took it literally and had an actual quota for how many characters they wanted to kill during the session, including people who were later resurrected in some way. There were over 20 character deaths between the tables, where there were about 7 or 8 tables, with 6 players each. It just felt like such a terrible way to end a really great year. As my friend commented, they said it was clearly a skill issue, as we should have just twin-spelled Death Ward beforehand. TLDR, Dungeon Master twin-spelled Powerword Kill on our level 7 to 8 party during the finale of our college game, and kind of ruined the year for me. Yeah, I can see why that ruined a year of gaming for OP. It sounds to me like the Dungeon Masters wanted to make a memorable last fight, but went a tad overboard for parties of that level. And I wonder how each table was affecting the other if they were all fighting the same boss. Was it like a multiverse type deal? Anyway, if I was that DM, I would not want to take out 2 of the players before the last fight, because it just feels cheap to do so and would ruin the 2 players' nights. It's one thing to die during a fight, but to be taken out with what I personally consider to be one of the cheapest and most overpowered spells would really suck. And I can kinda see why OP just kind of checked out at that point. That was definitely an overpowered encounter, in my opinion. Though, what do you all think on this one? Have you ever had a DM pull something cheap like this on you? If so, be sure to share in the comments, or even post it to the DnD Doge subreddit. And who knows, it may just end up in a video. But with that said, let's move on. How do I get my player invested in his character enough to stop killing himself? By Reddit user Jimmy Twinkletoes. I have one member of my group that makes a player character with the same nonchalant evil attitude and personality every campaign. I have tried to focus on his character in previous campaigns, but it feels like every offer I give his character for defining moments is met with indifference. And he will not stop committing suicide because he doesn't care about any of his characters. This campaign, I have requested that the party is allied with a good faction known as the Zenith, and that they find their own reasons for being allied with them. This member of my playgroup tells me that he wants his character to be, quote, evil as F. At first, I want to tell him, no, your party is good. But I figure it's okay that he's evil, as long as he has a reason to be allied with this faction. Sure enough, he finishes his character, and the only background I get is that he wants to murder wizards for having created him. Now, I don't think that's a bad start. At least, it's a raison d'etre. I'm just wondering, how can I do this differently this time to actually get him involved with his character, instead of just playing an evil John Doe? I should note, this guy is one of my best friends, and a longtime member of the group, so kicking him is not an option. He loves to play, he's an active player, and this is his favorite game. He just is never too invested in his character, and I think often he likes to try and shake my plans as a DM, so he does things so far out of character that often result in suicide. Like attempting to catch a BBEG's blade in his mouth twice in a row. Yes, that really happened. I do not care to run a good campaign. the good faction is only a plot point for the story to progress. I explicitly told my players that they don't have to be good, just have their own reason to ally with the good faction. I'm looking for a way to get my player to feel like his player character and choices are important enough that he doesn't just kill himself over and over again. Any ideas? Well, that certainly is a conundrum. It kinda sounds to me like this player isn't taking the game as seriously as OP would like them to, or just likes to play and try out all kinds of different builds. I would say the best bet here is to just pull the player aside and talk to them. Tell them that you would like to have his character have more impact in the story, and that you would like them to try to take the game a bit more seriously. Hopefully, after that, he will understand where you're coming from, and not be so risky with his decisions in-game. Though, what suggestions would you give OP here? Let's move on. Me and the Criminals: How to End a Campaign at First Session, by Reddit user NoFinding2468. This just happened, and after lurking here for a long time, it made me want to post. Here's a story about how to end a campaign in the first session. Yeah, believe me, I'm baffled. I joined a table at my local gaming store, and everything seemed great. The Dungeon Master looked experienced, and the players seemed nice enough. Last week, the Dungeon Master asked us to present our characters to him and come up with a reason that they were locked up. Since I was playing a goblin, my character, Gob the Goblin, was arrested for urban disorderly conduct. He'd been having the time of his life, casting illusions around the city and scaring some folks. I thought it was a nice reason. Not too evil, but enough to get arrested, right? The first session came around, and the other players started describing why their characters were arrested. One said murder. Alright, that's bad, but hey, this is D&D. It's not unheard of. Then the player went off, detailing a very sadistic torture, followed by the most grotesque words I've ever heard. Seriously. I thought maybe it's just this one guy. But nope. The next one was worse. The R word, followed by what I assume was supposed to be a description. I didn't stick around to hear it. I stood up immediately and said, "Nope, this is not the table for me. Y'all belong on a list or something." I've never left someplace so fast in my life. For real, what the F? This is fantasy, D&D. If I wanted to see disturbing crap, I'd turn on my TV to CNN. Jeez. And this is why Session 0 is so important. It is perfectly fine to play campaigns with way dark themes like those listed, but a Dungeon Master should have a Session 0 in order to lay out said themes and make sure all the players are comfortable with them. Now, why a player would want to play a character with a past offense of the R word is beyond me. But with a player that wanted his offense to be murder, like OP said, that is pretty standard D&D fare, especially if they're playing an evil-aligned character. Though, what gets me is that this game was being played in a public setting, so you would think that the DM and the players would play a game with more tame themes, as there would be customers being able to hear them playing, but that is on them and the store owner. The main takeaway from this is that OP figured out that the game wasn't for them and did the right thing and left, though insulting the other players and the DM may have been a bit of a dick move, but that is just my opinion. On to the next one. I used to be a really crappy player, by Reddit user Simone3344555. There was a point in our lives where each of us was a newer player, and I would have really appreciated if I had been taught some etiquette, as in, just tell me, don't do that because of X. Of course, there are D&D rules, but stuff like metagaming, or the fact that the DM is on your side, and not the enemy, just isn't really taught. The closest thing I had to D&D were video games, where nobody cared if I cheated a bit. Of course, I never cheated with dice rolls. I understood that much. But when the Dungeon Master introduced us to a new monster, I would look it up to find out its weakness, and then tell the group. Never was I told not to do that. I would not have been insulted at all if someone had corrected me, because it ruins the immersion, etc. The importance of role-playing in general wasn't really ingrained into my brain. Again, for me, this was basically a video game. So, I am sorry to my D&D crew, but I also want to ask that the more experienced D&D players educate us less experienced ones when we do something wrong, especially on metagaming and the role of the Dungeon Master. I genuinely thought that Dungeon Masters in general just wanted to kill our characters, but no, they want to maximize our enjoyment, and a Dungeon Master will more often than not bend the rules a bit if it means to keep the enjoyment of the party. I understand that some of these things can be expected of newer players to know, but I genuinely did not, and everyone knew that I had no experience. I tried to correct my behavior after finding out that I fell into the, quote, "but my character would do that" stereotype. Not because I wanted to justify doing crappy things, but because I genuinely wanted to act as in character as possible after having failed that previously. It sucks when my character was a do-gooder paladin that would absolutely report the party for theft. I didn't want to do that, but I felt I would be a bad player if I hadn't. Anyway, I believe that now that a couple of years have passed, that I am experienced enough to know how to play without metagaming and staying in character without ruining the fun of my fellow players. Still, if you ever have a problem player, it helps to just tell them. I am super embarrassed about my past and really wish that just one person had told me. This just goes to show how important communication is in a tabletop RPG like D&D. There are so many horror stories I read where they would not have been horror stories if someone just talked to a player that is being a problem, and is often the advice I give after reading said stories. At least OP was self-aware enough that they were able to figure out what they were doing wrong, probably by reading some of these stories or watching videos like these. Though perhaps the other players just weren't bothered by OP's previous actions in the game enough to call them out on it. We all start from somewhere, and none of us are expert role players when we do. So I would say to OP, don't beat yourself up over your past behavior. Just look forward, and never stop improving, because none of us tabletop RPG enthusiasts ever stop improving, and enjoy the game without thinking about the past too much. But with that said, that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you, especially if you like, comment, and subscribe. And may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.